Okay, welcome. We are going to start tonight's work session in just a moment. And in doing so, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Cordy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening. So this evening, our work session is giving you the overview and orientation and information and facts related to our Sherwood School District employee group. So this is another one of those work sessions designed to provide that background knowledge, but also some information and data that's really specific to the last couple of years that's really important for us to talk about and for you as a board to know about. So in this work session, Steve Emmert, who is our Executive Director of Human Resources, will be leading us through that conversation. But please know that just like with all the work sessions, at any point when you have a question or a comment, just please interject because we really want you to do that all along the way. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Mr. Emmert.
Good evening, Dr. Cordy, Board Chair Hecker, Board of Directors. Tonight, we want to share some, just an employee group update. The presentation will include a fairly large amount of data. So I'll begin by sharing a bit of a context, just so that as we speak about some of these topics, I think you'll have a clearer understanding. As Dr. Cordy said, if you have questions along the way or items for discussion, please feel free to bring that up. I like dialogue, and so please don't be shy about doing that. Tonight, we'll compare Sherwood employee data today, as Dr. Cordy said, with some pre-COVID data. This presentation has been more fun to share in years past, I will tell you, but we have some unique challenges that have come to us through the pandemic that we'll talk about a little bit tonight. We'll compare our Sherwood retention data with that of surrounding districts and discuss some reasons why we're seeing some employee separation. And we'll discuss our current and likely future areas of focus. So before we get started, let me give you just a few definitions, and hopefully this is not overkill. I just want to make sure that as we speak through this information tonight, since there is so much information, that you have an idea as to who we're talking about. So just for starters, our classified staff are our hourly paid staff, and they are in positions such as instructional assistants, custodians, bus drivers, office staff, nutrition services, our maintenance department, to name a few. And then OSEA, or the Oregon School Employees Association, is their union. And so when you hear us talk about OSEA, we're talking about the classified union. Our certified staff are staff who are licensed. And so they are typically teachers, counselors, school psychs, those types of employees. And their union is the Sherwood Education Association, more commonly referred to as SEA. So when you hear us speak about SEA, it's that certified union. If you hear us talk about temporary employees, each year, whether it's due to hiring late, hiring mid-year, we have a handful of temporary employees, and they are people who we hire for short term up to 1 year. They automatically at the end of the year are non-renewed, and then if that position reopens, then they apply for that position again and compete for that spot. Probationary certified employees are permanent employees in their first 3 years of service. So like our first 3 years as teachers, they're probationary. And then contract certified employees are those permanent employees who are here for 4 years or more. So first, let's take a look at just the ethnic makeup of our employees. The reason we focus on this is because the demographics of our Sherwood student population has changed over the years. And so we have tried really hard to spend some time focusing on hiring employees who are our kids, who our kids can look to as people being like them. So we try to hire people of color. We try to hire bilingual people. Overall, when we hire, we try to hire the very best person we can find. But diversifying our workforce is something that we've tried to focus on, and we have made some progress on. I will tell you though, in the state of Oregon, this is slow work. Most of our educators throughout the state are white. And so it's really hard to find a more diverse population to hire. So we have made some progress. As you can see in this slide, most of the progress has come with our classified staff, but there has been some progress across the board over the last couple of years. In 2019-20, pre-pandemic, we'll refer to that as pre-pandemic. As you can see, 63% of our certified staff were at the top half of our salary schedule, a demonstration of the longevity our district has enjoyed. Sherwood has developed over the years a reputation of being a destination district. And what we mean by that is people have wanted to come here. They have oftentimes even left surrounding districts to come and work for our district. Oftentimes they move here with their families and become community members. Sometimes they look for more affordable communities to live in, but still want to teach here. And what we've seen is that once people enter the workforce in Sherwood, overall they have stayed. This is a place where they want to remain throughout their career.
Quick question, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
The salary steps on the side and then in comparison with the longevity. So is that in terms of years with the district?
Yes, so
Okay.
the step typically equates to a year.
Okay,
So they're hired typically at, well, we don't have a hiring cap for our licensed staff. So they could be hired at any one of those steps. We honor their years of experience. But
okay,
if there was somebody right out of college, for instance, they'd be hired at step 0
okay.
and then work their way up.
So, okay, so when you say 63% longevity in 2019, 2020, that's staff that's not necessarily been in the district for 16 years, but has been a teacher for 16 years.
Yes, and the 63% is steps 11 through longevity. So it's that top half of our salary schedule. And they are people who have been, yes, in education. You bet. It's a good question. So as you can see in 2021, in spite of the staffing challenges we'll talk about tonight, people still overall are staying. We have right now in those top steps 11 through longevity, 65.8% of our licensed staff. We've seen more turnover, I would say. And what you'll see on this slide and in some slides to come is that we have probably more people who are at the very beginning of their career, but that large group of people who are in that steps 11 to longevity category remains. So overall, people are staying. We also try to keep track of how many people we have who are eligible to retire, and this number is growing. People are not retiring out of education as early as they did at one time. Right now, this year, 2021-22, we have 38 certified staff members who are eligible for either full or partial retirement. We have 73 classified staff members in that category, and then 6 administrators. So far this year, we've had 4 certified and 3 classified employees announce their retirement. And some of them are retiring actually this month, and some of them are retiring at the end of the school year, or they're retiring this month, but working through the end of the school year, working back. We're guessing that we will have more retirement announcements, but we never know until we get them. So now we get to some of the more challenging parts of the conversation. Although we've added 20 classified positions since 2019-20, we have 4 fewer employees than we had in 2019 because we have 24 unfilled positions. And many of those are SPED instructional assistants. So when I say SPED, special education instructional assistants and custodians. We have been able to pick up a couple of custodians over the past month, but we're still down 4, I believe, custodians, and we're still down a good number of special education assistants. We have tried all kinds of things to solve that challenge, including reaching out to employment agencies and hiring people through through contracted outside sources, which we typically, don't have to do we haven't had to do in the past, but we've been able to get a few people that way. I just talked to the third agency today, and we're finding that this is, as I'll show you in some slides coming up, this is a challenge really nationwide. Oregon has been hit hard in terms of just people leaving the profession for one reason or another. We've also been able to add some certified positions due to our student investment account state funding. And we have a few more who are temporary because we had to hire later this last year than we typically do. Due to retirements and employee departures, you'll see there are more probationary 1 people than we had the last time we looked at this data. But overall, we've been able to fill the bulk of our licensed positions. Right now, we have a few open. We're trying to fill just because we had some recent departures, people moving out of state or retiring. And so we have a couple of spots we're trying to fill, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. This slide compares the pre-pandemic time period between July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2020 with what we call our pandemic time period. So July 1st, 2020 through this month. And as you can see on this slide, last year and this year, like other districts across the state, we've lost employees much more rapidly than we have historically. As this slide shows, with 6 months yet to go, more than 2 times the number of classified employees have left our district. And so far, 10 more certified employees have left than we saw 2018 through June 2020. Again, we've been able to fill most of our licensed positions. We still have a couple that we're working on, and we are struggling, like the districts around us, to fill our classified positions. There are not the same number of people applying for those jobs, no matter, it seems like what we do to try to recruit, they just don't seem to be out there. In visiting with directors of human resources in our surrounding districts, it was no surprise that all districts are struggling to retain staff. I was a little bit surprised that some districts haven't collected this data, so we weren't able to get as much of it as we had hoped to for our comparison. But as you can see on this slide, we have some work to do in addition to the districts around us having work to do. Although, so we were able to find this data, and you'll see that since July 1st, 2021, we have lost 1.6% of our certified staff. Again, we've been able to fill those positions as they have been vacated. And we've lost 8% of our classified staff. Again, that's been the challenge. Beaverton is sharing that they've lost 5% overall of their staff. And we'll talk a little bit later tonight about some retention kinds of things some other districts have been able to do this year that I think might be helping. Hillsboro's lost 20% of their staff, 11% certified, 9% classified. And then McMinnville reported they had lost 4% overall of their staff. The other districts who were able to get back to us had not collected the data, but all of them reported that retention was a significant challenge this year. It seems that people vacating these kinds of positions, it seems like education and the medical field are kind of the 2 big places where people are walking away from their careers and deciding to do something different. And so there could be lots of reasons for that. One of the periodicals I read is Human Resources Today. And in the November 2021 issue, the article I was reading talked about the fact that it was talking about just this trend of people across the nation walking away from their careers and doing something completely different. And in that article, it said that 43% were seeking a higher salary. We know that's been the case in education for a long time. People spend a lot of time in school and probably are not paid as well for the work they do as many other careers. Better work-life balance or mental health situation. We have found that coming out of the pandemic and coming out of comprehensive distance learning, life is different. It's changed. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit later as well. A desire to learn new skills, as a desire for better or more training opportunities, and a change your career in changing career direction. One of the things that we work really hard on in this district to our succession plan. So we try to provide as many opportunities as we can for our educators who want to move into some kind of a leadership position. We've been able to, I should have brought a list. It's been pretty incredible as we look back over the last 10 years, how many of our educators have moved up into leadership positions in our district. It's pretty exciting. But we have also lost some because we just haven't had positions available when they were ready. And so they've moved on to other districts so that they can move into those positions. And then we get a few like Mr. Shuckrow who come back. One of our challenges comes from the fact that many districts over the last couple of years have received millions of ESSER dollars. We did receive some, but a very small amount compared to the districts around us, and where they have other sources of income, such as a local option, which Sherwood does not have. In spite of that, until this year, we've been able to remain extremely competitive in the wages that we pay and in our benefit package. We regularly conduct wage analyses for employee groups, comparing our wages to and benefits to 11 districts in our geographic area who are our size or larger. This comparison group was chosen many years ago prior to me being in this role, but I've been told that the unions and the district agreed together who the comparison group would be made up of. And they looked at things such as demographics, the size of the district, the same region, cost of living, districts we typically compete with for employees due to our location, those kinds of things. Wage analyses are built into bargaining every 2 to 3 years. And then we do the same thing for our administrators and our confidential staff and our directors. In addition to that 2-year cycle, we do a wage analysis on a 7-year cycle for all of our classified employee groups. So not only do we look at our classified wages during bargaining, we look at all of those wages again in this cycle where we focus on specific employee groups. Our goal always to make sure that we are paying at least at the median. We choose the median versus the average because average can very easily be distorted based on really high numbers or really low numbers on either end, where the median is a more descriptive data set. And so that's what we use for our comparison. And we've been able to keep at or above, typically above the median every year for our employee groups. This table shows, this is until recently. So this table shows our wages this year. We conducted a wage analysis within the past month and discovered that just during the pandemic, we're now below the median. And in fact, our closest neighbor, Tigard Tualatin, is now paying between $4 and $5 an hour more for some of our hardest to fill positions. This one is specific to our special education instructional assistants. And we've lost some people this year to Tigard Tualatin because they can move there to a neighboring district and earn more money. This slide shows the same thing for custodians. So that's the other hardest to fill employee group right now. And kind of the same thing has happened. We've lost some people because they can go elsewhere just over this last year and a half and earn more money. In addition, it's kind of we also have this kind of bizarre chicken and egg thing going on where not only can they earn more money if they go, but if they stay, because we're short-staffed, they're working really hard, many of them overtime, to try to meet the needs of our buildings. And so they're tired. We're seeing the same thing to some extent with teachers. Because we're so short-staffed with custodians, many of our teachers, they want their classrooms to be clean every day. And so they'll, after contract hours, clean their classrooms and they're tired. And so we're doing our best to figure out how to address that. We've had administrators doing some cleaning. Some of us from the district office have been out in the building subbing. We're just trying to do the best we can to meet needs.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So looking at the difference in pay, have there been conversations, given our need and the vacancies and the comparison next to, to right next door? Are there conversations happening about that?
we're in conversations all the time about that. And typically the only time that pay would change, and I know this is a unique time, but typically the times pay would change would be during bargaining, where we would bargain, for instance, the cost of living adjustment, and it would impact all of the classified staff or all of the certified staff, or all of our administrator team. Or during the wage analysis, that 7-year cycle where we look at specific employee groups. And during those times, we compare our wages to all of those other comparison groups and make sure, again, that we are at or above the median. And so we're constantly adjusting wages. We haven't in the past looked at a specific group outside of that and just adjusted those wages, because anytime you do that outside of bargaining, you may adjust for one group, but then you have a whole bunch of other groups who are frustrated because they didn't get a raise along with those groups. We are currently looking at some other kinds of things that we can do outside of bargaining that we're hoping will make a difference.
Okay, thank you.
In the regular board meeting tonight, SEA President Kyler Pace will share some information from an SEA survey. We've been really trying to listen to our staff and address the things that we can address. But I want to share a few challenges that we've been hearing off and on throughout the year. One of them has to do with a larger workload, coming back from comprehensive distance learning with some new initiatives that we have in place that we're putting into place and currently working on. We have heard a number of times that people they're tired. They're really tired. They feel like there's just a lot of work to do and there's less time to get that work done. And so that's something that we're really paying attention to. And our executive team will have a deep conversation about that tomorrow and talk about some possibilities for addressing some of that. Teachers have expressed a desire to have either less professional development or have it in such a way that it doesn't take away from their preparation time. We've heard a lot about student behaviors looking different, coming back from kids being at home for a year, and an attempt to find I think some ways to address that so that we're able to keep class moving forward and meet the needs of kids. Another one is lack of substitutes. We contract with a substitute agency whose title is ESS. I don't remember what that stands for, but they are reporting that they only have 30% of the workforce they had pre-pandemic. And I believe that we cannot get subs. And that's why we have talked more and more about how can we be out in buildings bringing some relief at the secondary level. Because we've not been able to get subs, we've been paying teachers to sub during their prep period way too often, which means they don't then get a prep period during the day. They're compensated for it, but then there's no break from start to finish. And so I think many of the subs were elderly and retired, and they thought, this isn't worth it. I don't want to do this. And there are others who were hired by other districts with ESSER dollars. And so there just aren't many available. Classified subs are, for the most part, non-existent. We are limping through every single day with classrooms being understaffed with classified subs. And then the other things that we heard were just being understaffed, which we know and we're working on, and then a need for higher wages. Each year go ahead, Krista.
I was just wondering, because I'm curious, but I also don't want to breach any kind of, or put the cart before the horse, so to speak. But are you allowed to share some of the ideas from the last slide? Are you allowed to share like what you guys are talking about to help with some of these issues, or is it too soon to do that?
So we have the slide after this one. I can talk about what some surrounding districts have been doing, and that'll be a part of our conversation as well. You bet. So in this slide, one of the things that I do as people are leaving for any reason that they choose to leave. Now, this would exclude people who are on a temporary contract and we just don't have that position the next year, so we don't rehire them. I don't conduct exit interviews for those because it wouldn't make sense to. But when people retire, or when people resign because they're moving out of state or to another district, I meet with as many of those people as I can just to find out what we're doing well and need to continue to do, and what are maybe some areas for improvement for us. We want to keep getting better, so we want to hear those things. And the kinds of things that overall, it's been great. People, I think, are really honest, and overall, they've given really positive feedback, I think, in terms of what it was like to work for Sherwood. But what I will say is that out of the ones that I have conducted over the past year and a half, 33 of them have accepted positions either out of state, they moved out of state, or in another district. Some have retired. Some left because they were frustrated due to mandates, the intense workload, or just cultural changes. I think, what I've heard from some people is that education's always been a lot of hard work, but the benefits have always outweighed the hard work. What we see in kids has always made this work worth it. And more, we're hearing just a lot of people questioning whether or not this is the profession they want to continue in. And I have to say, it's being an educator of many, many years. I started teaching in 1983 and loved every day of it. And it's heartbreaking right now to talk to people and just to hear their frustration. And again, we will do everything within our power to change that. There are some things that are obviously not within our control, but we'll do everything we can to change that. And then there were some who just, they said they left for personal reasons, didn't want to give a reason, and they always have the right to not share. 40 of the positions were temporary positions who we just didn't have that position the next year, or we hired somebody else into that position the next year. And so I didn't conduct exit interviews for them, but it was a fairly large number. So to answer, I think, Krista, the last question you had a little bit better, some examples of retention incentives we're seeing in surrounding districts are paid wellness days or additional work days. And so in lieu of student contact days, these would be additional paid days for teachers to come in and prep, or some districts have just given them a paid day off as a wellness day. That's something that we have talked about. Hiring, referral, or retention bonuses. Again, ESSER dollars have been used for the bulk of that. We've not been able to do that in our district. And so between that and then competing with districts who are significantly increasing their wages, that has created a challenge we've not experienced in the past. Allowing staff to work from home on non-student contact days, that's something that we had already started a year ago. So on their teacher work grading days, they can work from home. They just have to be available for virtual meetings or to take phone calls or whatever. It is a day of work, but they're professionals, and I think our teachers have done a really good job of demonstrating that can work well. And then a flexible schedule when other districts have, and this really pertains more to positions other than classroom teachers, people who are not working directly with kids, and just creating more of a flexible schedule where people part of their time work in other ways.
Steve, can I interrupt with a question?
Sure.
So the ESSER dollars that a lot of our neighboring districts are getting a whole bunch of, and we're not, is that sundowning? I mean, are these districts going to have a sustainable wage to pay, without those dollars? I mean, it just seems, not that we want to pay people less, but it just seems like a really short-term solution.
We've had that same conversation. I don't know how what's happening around us will be sustainable, because as far as we know, those dollars will go away at some point. And so it is the $100 question.
Yeah, it just seems like if that's the case, they potentially face massive cuts or, you know, or at least cuts in employees as a whole if they can't do that. So, okay.
And I'll tell you just from the seat I sit in every day or the workstation I stand at every day. I think a lot of decisions have been made this year, not to speak for other districts, but it has felt at times like we have to support kids. We have to teach. We have to support our special education, our students with significant needs. And when you can't find people, you find a way to find people. And so it has felt to me a little bit like that has happened. And thinking about 2 years from now is something we'll think about later. But right now, we just have to make sure we have staff. And if people have been able to do that, then, you know.
Can I jump in very quickly? Just for those that may not be used to all the acronyms that we use around here, ESSER, as we call it, is short for the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief. This is federal funds related to given to schools to help with COVID costs. And there's actually been 3 series of ESSER dollars, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Each one got progressively larger. And those dollars are distributed based on Title I allocations. And so because Sherwood has a small Title I allocation in comparison to some of our peer districts, we get significantly less dollars than they do. And Director Hecker, you are correct. Those are finite dollars. To our knowledge, there's no ESSER 4 coming from the federal government. And so those funds have to be expended, I believe, by 2025 for the final series, the ESSER 3 series, which was, again, the largest of the 3.
I have a question. Thank you for clearing that up because I was sitting here like, okay, do I ask now or so? For those funds, that makes sense about us getting less. What from those funds? Obviously, I get the salary, right? When you're offering that, how that isn't sustainable, not. But for like, I've heard of other districts doing like a bonus for teachers, you know, over the last year or before, just from all the extra that they've had to go through. Is that something that Sherwood did or was planning to do?
We have not to date, and really our ESSER funds have gone to support things like our ORVID courses for the kids, and most of our ESSER dollars also were spent on direct cost for COVID related, like PPE and some of those kinds of things. So to date, we've not done a bonus, and some of those that have given bonuses have actually given them out of their education foundations, not directly out of their school budgets.
Yeah, and we were
Jim?
able to do that in one of our last bargaining sessions. I want to say the one right before the one we finished this last year, where we, just because the workload seemed to be pretty high for teachers and some of our class sizes were a little bit larger, part of bargaining was to give them we didn't call it a bonus, but to give them an additional amount of money in January each year. And that still is in place. Our teachers still have that for workload, but we've not been able to address this year's workload in the same way that the districts you just described have.
Excuse me for a minute. Director Adamson, did you have a question or a comment?
I did, thanks. Jim, could you speak to, just for the folks watching at home, the very large disparity, like how much Sherwood is getting versus, say, Woodburn or Newburgh?
Certainly. So Sherwood received in the final ESSER round, ESSER 3, roughly $1.3 million. Our neighbors to the west in Newburgh received roughly $7 million. And I believe the number for Woodburn was $21 million. And all 3 of our districts are of very similar size. We just have different Title I allocations, and that makes the difference.
When do we have to use the funds by? So 2000.
Yeah, I believe ESSER 1 has to be expended by 2023, ESSER 2 by 24, and ESSER 3 by 25.
Is there like a resource that people would have, like if if they wanted to see how those funds were allocated or what remains, whatever that they can refer to for our, just for our district? Is it like available if we wanted to look at it?
I'm not sure we have it in an easily to digest format, but that is certainly something we could work on.
Just one other point of clarification for folks at home. Title I allocations are given to serve students and families who are navigating poverty, and because of the demographics of Sherwood, that's why those numbers are low.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, team. So as you can imagine, the focus in our coming months will be, number one, finding better ways to care for our current employees. We want to keep people, and we want to take care of people, and we want people to stay in education. We've been very fortunate in that through the years, we've been able to hire well. We have really amazing educators in our district and really amazing classified staff who are all about kids. And so our goal is to hang on to them. With that, a focus on staff relationships and connectivity, focus on recruitment, retention, and continuing to focus on succession plans. When we're bargaining this year, we'll be bargaining with both unions, for finances with SEA, our certified union, but full bargaining with our classified union. And so we'll be talking about things like retention and ideas for retention, and then continuing to work to diversify our workforce. So I'd like to, at this time, to open it up for other questions or discussion, whatever you have.
Yeah, I have a question. So you talked about the SEA survey that they recently did for the teachers, which is super helpful. Is the survey, do you know if it's done in a confidential basis, or is it not confidential? Is there distinguishing factors included in the survey that would?
No, I would say it's confidential. Nobody puts their name or level or the subject they teach, anything like that on the survey. I think with any survey, people, if they wanted to, could try to guess at who it was, but there is really no identifying factor in the survey that
Okay.
would be terribly helpful.
Is
It is confidential in terms of who submitted the information because of our partnership with SEA, and the same is true with OSEA.
Yeah.
When they conduct surveys like that, they share the information with us so that we know. Otherwise, we would have no way to address it.
Okay. And is it like, is it open-ended questions, or is it targeted questions where people have to select answers?
That is a great question, because as we all know, a survey can lead people to answers.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's a combination of the two. Some
Okay.
were very specific questions on their survey based on what I have heard, and some were more open-ended.
Okay.
There's always on those kinds of surveys also a comment section. And so even if they're very open-ended questions, people can write whatever they want in the comment piece, and that's where we get a lot of our information.
Okay. So there is space for people to just,
Mhm,
okay. Thank you.
you bet. Other questions? Jessica.
Dr. Aronson?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really curious about how we're evaluating, particularly meeting productivity. I think there's, in any organization, a certain amount of that's absolutely necessary, but then some meetings that we have because we've always had meetings. And so how are we working to evaluate that request around more time and trying to bring to necessity of a meeting versus an email? Or I know it's a hard thing because you're trying to build culture when you have new people and people have been away for a while, but on the flip side of that, reserving time for people to really be able to get ahead, especially if they're losing preps in order to be substitutes.
So your question is one of the very things we have talked about over and over and over in labor management. And, we've really focused in a couple of different areas. One is to make sure that at the elementary level, for instance, it looks the same in every building so that staff aren't comparing and frustrated because one building has 2 a month and the other 3 have 1 a month or whatever that might look like. So we've had conversations and we've made some adjustments based on what we've heard from SEA and then having conversations with those principals. The same is true at the secondary level. We know that middle school and high school are different, but we tried to make sure that our staff are required to do the same kinds of things at both levels. And so I think we've made some good headway that way. We've talked about, what kinds of information could go out in an email versus hosting another meeting. And then meetings are also tied to our early release time, our CLT time, because we're rolling out a multi-tiered system for intervention, because coming out of COVID, as we know, we just have a lot of kids who are really struggling. And so we are implementing a system district-wide that hopefully will help address the needs of all of our kids in a new kind of way, maybe a better kind of way. And so I think in those conversations, we've talked about what can those early release days look like? How can they offset some of the meetings we have? We're looking for time. What we hear, I think what we heard in that survey more than anything else was we need time. We have more work to do than we've ever had. And I think that, that is the feeling by a pretty large group of people. And we have less time because all of this stuff is happening. And so we're looking for ways to create time for people.
Can I add to that? One thing we also did, the teaching and learning team had a strategic planning meeting just last week, and our focus shifted from, how are we going to accomplish what we initially set out to try to accomplish for the strategic plan to what is sort of we really need to accomplish to move the work forward this year, and trying to really shrink that change down around our CLT implementation, around MTSS to the minimum to try to free up teachers from some of this extra work. And so we took a whole different strategic approach from how do we do what we originally thought we might do or should do to what do we need to do. We've also reduced the number of staff meetings and made those consistent. So we're down, was it 1 a month we're down to, Steve? We're down to 1 a month from 2 a month. And so we've cut some meetings out and we're looking at reducing some work just really strategically in response to what we're hearing from our teachers.
In addition to that, so teaching and learning working, as Mr. Bennett said, on their areas of focus in the strategic plan, but we're also having conversations at the exec team level, and we'll go deeper into that tomorrow, about when we come to you as a board in January at the work session about the strategic plan, what is that going to look like based on what we're hearing from our staff, and so rather than just bringing the strategic plan with all of the laudable goals and elements within that and presenting that to you and asking you to hold us accountable to that, and then we report back on that, on our attainment or lack thereof, challenges, bright spots, what could it look like to really adjust that so that we can provide even more supports beyond teaching and learning, to just help provide some relief. We know that there is, we hear about initiative fatigue. We hear about needing more time. And so just know that we're thinking about what that could look like when we bring the strategic plan as a whole to you in January. So we're working on that a lot tomorrow too, in our exec team retreat.
So aside from coming up with a whole bunch of money that sadly we don't have in the district to mitigate the problem, are there other things as board members that would be helpful? Anything we can do? Obviously that's not an easy answer. And
if
but
you
is
ever
there
decide
anything
you
we can
want to sub as a classified employee, just give me a call because we could plug you in 5 days a week.
So sorry, Dirk. So Chair Hecker, I have, not a specific response to your question, but a general one. And that is, over the course of the next bit of time, in the early in the new year, if we're able to think of creative ways to provide some relief, everything ultimately it links back to time and human resources and fiscal resources ultimately. And decisions about how to free up time will not usually make everybody happy. Or how to adjust time, or what that could mean. And I don't have a specific example to give you right now, but just when we're looking at the calendar, when we're looking at how to provide some relief, if we get clarity around that and bring some recommendations to you, I would say, Chair Hecker, what you could do is just as you always are, really be open, and know though that no matter what, there's probably not just easy decisions to make.
Yeah, thank you. After my goofy comment, that she said it much better than I would have, but I think that really is what we need. Today is different than education 2 years ago looked. And I think because times have changed, things have changed, we need to adjust and find ways to do that. Otherwise, retaining any staff, I think, in public education is going to be a challenge.
Is there an opportunity for, we have board members that take part in committees and that kind of thing. Is it appropriate, or is there an opportunity for board member involvement aside from, of course, the end result of you bringing the strategic plan to us, but the more ideas, right, the better, the more you can bounce it. If there is room for board member involvement in that, I would be happy to dedicate my time and be willing to be a part of that.
Thank you for that.
Dr. Adamson?
So back to Steve's comment, I wonder, I think there's a struggle everywhere trying to find folks that will fill some of these positions. And there are some positions where it takes longer to train than may be useful in this. But I think if our community knew that the real depth of shortage of individuals and how desperately we need folks to be able to pick up shifts. If we could, I think really creatively about, are there ways for folks to agree to do a shift or maybe 2 a week and help fill in some gaps that may be some opportunity for members of this community. But I think it also may provide relief. And if people, I'm not sure that our community fully understands how the shortages in these positions really create stress on our learning communities, on our teachers, on our buildings, and just the overall sense that there's just not enough. I mean, we've all gotten real creative in these times. So if there's, I'd really be interested in, is there more thinking we can do and partnership that we can do with our community around filling a shift a week or being able to have folks step into that space? I think that's worth pondering. These jobs are hard and they need to be done right. And so it's not an easy volunteer gig. It's a real work. But I wonder if there isn't some sort of solution there. I'd also be really interested in hearing what we're doing with our student teachers around creating additional space for substitute teaching. I know that isn't a long-term solution to this because they're still learning for a reason, but we've gotten a lot more creative in healthcare about 4th-year nurses and using them at the top of their competencies at that stage in their career, knowing that in a month or 2, they'll be graduated and ready to become full-fledged nurses. How do we use folks that are student teaching at the top of their competency to provide some relief while we're struggling right now?
Yeah, Jessica, that's a really good question. So we have sponsored our student teachers. We've worked with our universities so that all of our student teachers can sub within the classroom where they're serving. And we also were able to work with George Fox so that one of our student teachers who is bilingual can not only sub in the classroom where she is doing her student teaching, she can also sub in our DLI, our dual language immersion classrooms. And so, yes, we've already gone down that road. We have also contacted universities to, most of the seniors in programs have already been hired by districts. So now we're trying to tap into those who are juniors in their programs to see if we can get them, have them serve maybe 4 hours a day as an instructional assistant as they're going through their programs. And so George Fox, for instance, is close enough in proximity, they could potentially buzz over, work a shift and get back for classes. So we're also looking at that.
A point of clarification or to interject into this part of the conversation, and Director Adamson, what I'm about to say is tangential, I think, to the point that you just made, but that is that we also are very aware that we need to have the conversation about having volunteers back in our buildings to help and provide supports. And so we have slated those conversations to happen. And it seems like a really easy decision to make, but then when you start peeling back the layers of the onion, you get volunteers back in schools, which we want, which would provide help. And then what's the next layer about who comes back into our buildings? And so what do we need to do to prepare for that? And so it's kind of bundled into a larger conversation, but one that we're going to be having really soon.
I have one more question because I know we wrapped up. One of the topics on the survey, the professional development and meeting overload, was one of the common themes from the SEA survey. Is there more of that, would you say, this year than previous years? Or has that always been a theme? Is it increased?
No, well, Gary will have to speak from the teaching and learning lens to some of this, but in terms of the number of professional development days on the calendar, it's the same this year as we've had in the past. I believe some of the biggest difference, honestly, is that there is some professional development happening that Gary could speak to more deeply, that pulls teachers occasionally out of the classroom during the day, and then it's challenging to find subs. And so we've tried to do that strategically. I think the other difference is people feel so overloaded that the days on our calendar that we have traditionally had as professional development days, and people I think overall have appreciated, now feel like an additional lift because they'd love to use some of that time in their classroom preparing in professional development.
Yeah,
Well-
and I would, oh, sorry.
We actually, so I think the challenge that specifically from reading the survey, what I took from it was the professional development days we have. So we have a couple of days in the week before school starts are set aside for professional development. We have one in October and one in January. And so those, we have, precious little time. And so we try to use those days to do as much professional development as we can. The ask of SEA specifically in this most recent round was, can you give us all or part of that day as just time to work? And so at every school, we plan no more than a morning's worth of professional development, and the whole afternoon is set aside for teachers. And even in the morning sessions, there's a presentation on a topic and then some time to work kind of thing. And so we really tried to give back, 3.5 or 4 hours and adjusted our plans. And again, that's paring back what we would, there's more work to do than we can possibly tackle. And we're just going to do a little bit less of it because people just aren't in a place where they're ready for it, and they need the time and they need that space. And so we gave it to them, and we're real intentional about that. So they'll come back from break to some professional development, and then they'll have a half a day to plan out sort of the next few weeks of their work or do whatever they need to do to catch up.
And I would just add, the interesting thing about the professional development is teachers and staff members have been begging every year for more professional development and more time. So this is very different than what we've ever heard. I mean, in the past, they've embraced it. They've begged for more. I think they're probably just, overburdened and just burnt out. And who in the world, when you're in that position, can take something on and be learning. So that is a complete change from
Yeah.
past years.
And you said, that they're wanting the time to be actually working in the classroom and so if I'm understanding you correctly, there is maybe more time out of the class on these days, out of the classroom for the meetings and such. Did I hear that right?
So I don't think I was very clear. So this
Okay,
is like
sorry.
we have a professional development day for all certified staff in the district scheduled for January 3rd, so right after winter break. And so on that day, instead of having, 6 or 7 hours of professional development, and when we do 6 or 7 hours of professional development, it's an hour presentation on a topic and a couple hours to work on implementing that topic, and then the next topic, a couple hours to work. In this one, it's more like 3 or 4 hours of professional
Gotcha.
development, and then a whole half day for every teacher, every certified staff in the district gets at least a half day of no strings attached work time. You're not working on the thing we just taught you about or talked to you about. You're working on whatever you personally need to do to get ready to teach. And so I think that's a big difference because, 4 hours of work time as a teacher is a super rare thing to find. And so there are some things we needed to move forward on that we just couldn't not do, but we've really tried to pare it down to those things. Does that help?
Yes.
And then some of the professional development we're pulling teachers out of class for is partially professional development, but it's more around like a curriculum adoption. Like we're working on our world languages curriculum adoption. And, to do an adoption like that, you have to pull the teachers together to meet, to go over the new standards that have changed, map out those standards, figure out kind of what competencies look like at each level, and then buy curriculum that matches that. And so it's really hard to get teachers together outside of the contract day to do that work because they have other responsibilities. And so the way to do that in the contract day is by having them get substitutes, but that just compounds our substitute problem. And so there's no super clean solution there. We need to move forward with these adoptions. And so we've tried to not schedule those on Mondays, Wednesdays, or Fridays. Wednesdays because it's an early release day, and Mondays and Fridays because that's when most people are taking personal days, and we have more absences on those days. So we're trying to do those on Tuesdays, and we're trying to be strategic about it. But that's the kind of thing Steve was talking about, people pull out of class. And I think it's less about them being pulled out and more about the strain that puts on a system when you add 5 more substitutes to a given Tuesday because you got to get the world language team together. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you for explaining that.
Anything else? Great. Thank you. We appreciate your insight and great discussion. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
And we will adjourn for a few minutes and reconvene at 7 o'clock for the regular school board meeting.